Hey guys, this is Mr. Epifano and I'm here to teach you about forms and systems of government. Now before we talk about different forms and different systems of government, we have to realize what is the purpose of government. Now I put that people form governments to establish order, provide security, and accomplish common goals. Now what exactly do I mean about that? Well, for example, to keep order, the government passes laws and they also establish courts. Now, when it comes to providing security, the government provides a national army and it also protects citizens from foreign attacks, like you think about terrorists. Also, the government provides certain services for the common good, like public health, public safety, public welfare, public education. And it also guides the communities when you think about like public policy and managing the economy and conducting foreign relations. Now, before we get into different forms of government, we just talked about the purpose of government. Now we're going to talk about in the United States. All right, we talked about this last chapter. We're going to talk about it again this chapter. There's three levels of government. The first level of government is our federal government. They control all of the United States. So they make laws for the nation, they make rules for citizenship, and they oversee foreign policy, election, and the military. We also have the next level, which is state governments, all right? Like Florida has its own state government. And they're in charge of making laws for the state, setting up local governments, smaller governments, and overseeing education and public health. Then we have local governments, which are the closest governments to us, and they run counties, cities, and towns. They provide school, police force, fire departments. They provide road maintenance, snow removal, trash collection, and other services like that. Now, let's get into our first form of government, and let's talk about what the United States has. The United States has a democracy, and the democracy is a form of government in which citizens participate in government, and they have their say in government. All right, and we just talked about that with your voting DBQ. Now, there's two types of democracy. The first one is called a direct democracy. In a direct democracy, citizens meet in one place and they take care of government matters in that one place. This does not work well with a large population. Imagine everybody in the United States flying to Washington, D.C. to vote on a bill to become a law. All right, it wouldn't make sense. Nothing would get done. So we have what's called a representative democracy, and where we vote for representatives in government who believe in the same things we do, and they take care of government matters for us. All right. The next form of government we're going to talk about is something called socialism. Now, socialist governments, they control large industries. They provide education, health, and welfare services while allowing citizens more economic choices. So they control big businesses, but the government does give people a little bit of a say of what they're going to do. Everybody makes what the government tells them to try to make everybody on an even playing field when it comes to their income. So, you know, a teacher may be making the same amount of money as a doctor in a socialist government. Now, communism, we mentioned before, and you were like, hey, Mr. Epifano, what is communism? Well, here it is, all right? The idea of communism is for everybody to be equal when it comes to what they make. Now, in communism, the government owns everything. There's no such thing as private businesses in communism. Walmart would be owned by the government. Farms would be owned by the government in communism. Now, unfortunately, this doesn't really work out too well. It's never really been practiced in history. Communism usually ends up turning into socialism. All right, now you learned a lot about this type last year. Now, this form of government is called a monarchy, and in a monarchy, there's one ruler, and it's either a king, a queen, an emperor, or an empress. All right. Now, in most traditions, this ruling position can be passed on the ruler's heirs, meaning their sons or their daughters. In some traditional monarchies, the monarch has absolute power. But let's talk about a special kind of monarchy that we have today in the United Kingdom or in England. All right. Now, in England, they have what's called a constitutional monarchy, where they do have a queen, but the queen has absolutely no power. The queen is only there for parades and special events, basically. She's just a figurehead. She has no actual power. England is actually a democratic government that limits the monarch's control. The next form of government we talked about last year when you learned about ancient China, and this was called oligarchy. Now, in an oligarchy, a government in which a few people has a dominant clan or clique, they control all of the government. So oligarchy is a government ruled by few. Now, the next form of government, it's called autocracy. Now, if you remember your Latin roots, auto means self. So an autocracy is ruled by a single leader, and we usually call this leader a dictator. Now, this is a form of government by one person with absolute power, and you can see in the pictures here that we have some examples of some autocracies, whether you're talking about Hitler during the Nazi regime, Stalin in the Soviet Union. You're also talking about Mussolini from Italy during World War II, and you're also talking about Saddam Hussein, who used to be in charge of Iraq. Now, you can see that these videos that I'm skipping over, you can view them on your own because I posted the regular Prezi on PowerPoint. So whenever you get a chance, just open the regular Prezi without me talking, and you can view those videos. Now, we talked about different forms of governments. Now, let's talk about different systems of government. Now, so you don't get confused between forms and systems of government, just because one government is this form of government, they can also be a system of government. A form is just the idea behind their government, what kind of government they're going to have, and the system of government is how that government actually works. So when we're talking about England, we talked about how their form of government is a constitutional monarchy. They also use the system of what's called a unitary system in which all power resides in a central government. So if we compare that to the United States, think about this. Pretend that there's no state governments, no local governments, there's only the central government or the federal government in Washington, D.C., and they have power over the country. And that's what England has right now, and even Cuba. It's called a unitary system, meaning they only have one level of government, and that's the national government. The next system of government is also a famous one that you can find in England, and it's called the parliamentary system. Now, we're going to talk about branches of government later on in the year, so it's okay if you're confused when I say the executive branch is chosen by the legislative branch. Just know that it's a unitary system, meaning it's a centralized government, has control of the entire country, but also it's a parliamentary system because they use a group called Parliament. Parliament is their central government. It's kind of like if you think about our Congress in the United States. The next system of government is what's called a confederal system. In a confederal system, it is almost the exact opposite of a unitary system. In a confederal system, there are state governments, and they have more power than the central government. So if you think about if we had that system in the United States, Florida state government would technically have more power than what they have in Washington, D.C. Now, last but not least is what we have in the United States. So our form of government is a representative democracy, and our system of government is what's called a federal system. This is when you have a centralized government that shares power with smaller governments which are usually state governments or local governments. So think about that. We have a federal system of government in Washington, D.C., and they share power with the other two levels of government in the United States, which are state governments and local governments. So that's it, guys, for forms and systems of government. Make sure that you fill out your guided notes worksheet and you turn it in by Thursday. If you have any questions whatsoever, you can ask me, you can ask Mr. Huff, or you can ask Mr. Swartz. Thank you. Have a great day.